Hello, everybody. This is the video for Module 21 for Business, Math, and Calculators. In this video, we're going to be talking about what we call measures of central tendency and measures of variation. Those are just fancy ways of talking about things like the mean, the median, the mode, and then the things like the range, variance, and standard deviation. So basically, this video is a quick look at some basic statistical values that you might encounter in everyday life, really. So we're going to go through an example problem where we use a data set and calculate each of the values that I just mentioned. So with that, I will share my screen and we will walk through the steps associated with calculating each of these values. Alrighty, so let's go ahead and look at some sample problems for calculating mean, median, mode, range, variance, and standard deviation. So we'll jump into our first calculation, which involves finding the mean. So for all of these parts to this problem, we're going to use the same data set. So our context for this situation is going to be like the high temperatures for the week. So I've just got a list of temperatures there in degrees. And so to find the mean, there's two steps involved. Okay, the first step is you take all the numbers in your list and you add them up. You find the sum of the numbers or the sum of the values in your data set. So we're literally going to just add the numbers up. In this case, the sum happens to equal 500. Once you find the sum, the second step is to take that sum and divide by the number of values in your data set. So there are 7 numbers altogether. So we take 500 divided by 7. And we end up with a weird decimal in this case. And, a lot of times that happens when you find the mean or the average is it's not going to necessarily divide out nicely. So it makes sense to round your number off. And depending on the context, you can decide to what place you need to round things off. The tenths is usually a reasonable spot to round. So that's what I did in this case. So we end up with a mean or average value of 71.4 degrees in this case. Okay? And that's our solution. That's what we're looking for. And again, the mean gives you an indication of kind of where the middle is of the values. Okay, so in general, we have things that go from 68 up to, it looks like 75 in our list. And so in the middle value roughly is around 71.4, okay, or the typical value in this situation. All right, now let's transition and talk about the next measure of central tendency, and that is what we refer to as the median. And this is just another way to kind of try and indicate the typical or the middle value. And what the median literally is it is the middle number in your list of values. Okay? Now the catch though, when you find the median is before you determine what that value is, you have to arrange your values in order from smallest to largest. Okay, so what you can see that I've done out here on the screen is I've literally just reordered the numbers that were in the original list and then put them from smallest to biggest. Once you do that, you find the literal middle number in the list. In this case, 71 falls right in the middle. You can get to that value. What some people will do is they'll just start crossing off a number off of each end until they get to the middle. You can count up and figure out, how many numbers, you should count until you find that middle number, whatever method works best for you. But the key thing is it's the literal middle number in your list. So in this situation, our median is 71 degrees. All right. So again, this just gives you another way of kind of deciding what the typical value most likely is in your situation. Notice that the median can be different than the mean. So we got a mean of 71.4. We got a median value of 71. That's okay for those values to be different. They're in the same ballpark. They're close to one another, but it just kind of gives us a different way of deciding, like I said, what the typical value likely is close to. All right, the next measure of central tendency is what's referred to as the mode. Okay. And again, with the mode, what is helpful, it's not required with the mode, but it's helpful a lot of times to organize your list because it makes it a little bit easier to spot the mode because there's really no calculation involved. The mode is literally the number that shows up the most number of times. It's the number that's repeated most often. So in this situation, 75 shows up twice in our list. So 75 is the mode. Okay? It's the number that's repeated most often in your list of values. Okay? Again, no calculation involved. It's just a matter of counting up and finding which one is repeated the most number of times. And there you go. That's our mode. So those are the three values that are associated with measures of central tendency. They are values that give you a sense of kind of what the typical value or the middle number or however you want to think about it, what that number is in your data set. Now we're going to transition to measures of variability, of variance. And what these values talk about is they give you a sense of kind of how the data is spread out. Okay, is one way of thinking about it. Kind of tells you, are the numbers close together in general? Are they different? Do they vary quite a bit from one number to the next? That's what these values are intended to indicate. Now, the easiest one of those values to calculate is what's called the range. And the range is fairly simple. What you do is, and again, you don't have to put the list in order, but it definitely helps, especially if you've already done it for calculating things like the median. Just go back to that ordered list. And what you do for the range is you look to find the smallest value in your list, and you look to find the largest value in your list, and you simply subtract them. The range is the difference between the biggest value and the smallest value. So in this case, the range equals 7. Okay, that's giving you an indication. So in this situation, the temperature, the high temperature for the week only ranged or varied by 7 degrees from smallest to biggest. All the values were somewhere within that range. Okay, so 7 is our range. All right, the next value we need to calculate is referred to as the variance. Now, this is probably the most difficult value to calculate because there's a lot of steps involved. And this is a very statistical value. You probably won't have to do this a whole lot in this class beyond kind of what we're doing in this section, just because we're not going to focus on the statistics as much. But I want to show you how to do it just so you're aware of what this value is and where it comes from, and the fact that you might run across it from time to time. To find the variance, what you do is you take each value in your data set and you do the difference between your value and the mean. So we already calculated the mean for our value, for our data set, excuse me. It was 71.4. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with 68. That was the smallest value in our list. And I subtract the mean. Now I do happen to get a negative value, but what you do is after you do the subtraction, you square that value. And so you end up ultimately with a positive value, which in this case is 11.56. Okay? Now what you do then is you repeat that process for every value in your list. So now I'm going to take the next number, which is 69, subtract 71.4. I get negative 2.4. I then square that value, and I get 5.76. And like I said, you repeat that for the rest of the values in your list. So it's kind of a tedious process, really, having to do that subtraction and that squaring for every value. What you end up with then is this list of kind of how values compare to the mean. To calculate the variance, what you do is you find the sum of those values that we calculated. So I just added up 11.56, 5.76, so on and so forth, and came up with 45.72. And then you divide by the number of values in the data set. So we did this 7 times, so that's why we divide by 7. And so we end up with a variance of 6.5314. Again, you're a lot of times going to get weird decimals, and so it's appropriate to round off. So our final answer for the variance is going to be 6.53. So again, notice like for our range, that value was a fairly simple calculation. We just got 7. The variance is kind of in the same ballpark. It's just telling you how the values are kind of spread out, okay, how far apart they are. One last value to calculate, and this is probably a value that you see listed more often, and this is what's called the standard deviation. And the standard deviation is actually easy to calculate once you have the variance. So again, you have to do the work to find the variance. The standard deviation is the square root of the variance. So if I take the square root of the 6.5314, the value we just calculated on the previous screen, and take, again, the square root of it, I get 2.56. And so the standard deviation is simply that value. Now, where you see the standard deviation used a lot is what they might indicate is they'll usually say, you know, like the mean of the data set is like 71.4, and then the standard deviation is 2.56. You might see something like where you'll see 71.4 plus or minus 2.56. It kind of gives you a range where most of the values tend to fall. And so a lot of times, like if you see a data set and they give you, you know, like a plus or minus something, you know, to give you an indication of kind of what the typical value, like poll values are a good example. When you see polls for like political elections and things like that, they use the standard deviation as a way to kind of show you how accurate the mean is and where the typical values might fall. So there you go. That is our quick look at the value or the calculations for measures of central tendency and measures of variation. All right, that was a very quick look at the calculations. Hopefully the examples just give you a little bit of an indication as to how you go about calculating mean, median, mode, range, variance, and standard deviation. What we'll primarily see as we move forward in this class, if you're asked to use these values, is you'll probably be focusing more on the measures of central tendency, mean, median, and mode. And again, probably the most common one that you see come up a lot is mean or average. So this video just gives you an indication of how to calculate all those different values, but hopefully the video is helpful in illustrating that process. And you'll have a few homework problems that you'll be working on. So hopefully these will help clarify what you need to do to complete those calculations. As always, please let me know if you have any questions on things. I am always happy to help you out. Otherwise, thanks for watching the video, and I will catch you in the next video.